The stranger came to her door at the hour the bread was just out of the oven, and Hattie Lynn was sliding the second loaf onto the rack on the sill when she heard his boot on the lower step. She did not turn from the sill. She heard him stop. She heard him not knock. She heard him stand there as a man stands when he has decided not to ask for a thing he came to ask for. She set the cloth down on the kitchen block. "Door's open," she said without turning. The door was open. It had been open since the morning baking heat had filled the kitchen at 9, and Hattie had propped it with the iron she kept for the purpose. She heard him come up the second step. She heard him stop again. "I do not want to put you out, ma'am. You are not putting me out. There's bread enough for 2. There was a quiet. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel." She turned around then. The stranger at her door was a tall, lean man of about 32, dust on the brim of a brown hat held in his hand at his side, a faded gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled past the elbow, dark trousers worn at the knee, a small canvas bag at his hip, a tin cup hanging by its handle from the strap of the bag. His face was the gray pink of a man who had been walking in hard sun without enough to drink. He had a steady gray eye, and he held a look without making anything of it. Hattie Lynn was 26 that summer, the only baker between the Crossroads and the South Fork, the daughter and granddaughter of women who had each kept a kitchen the same way she kept hers. Her hair was pinned back simply with one strand loose at her temple from the heat of the oven. Her sleeves rolled past the elbow, a worn cream apron with flour at the front, her hands chapped and steady at her hips. She had been alone in the house since her grandmother had been carried up to the small cemetery on the rise 2 summers before, and she had run the kitchen alone since, and she had not put a man at her table in 25 months. "I have not got coin," the man said. "I have not got but a little. I will eat at the step if you will let me." "You will not eat at the step. The step is hot. Come in." He came in. He took his hat off properly the second time at the threshold and held it in his hand. He did not look around. He looked at her. "Sit down," she said. "The table is the one place in the kitchen the oven heat has not reached. I will bring you bread and butter and a little of the broth from yesterday and water from the well jar. If you want more after that, you can have more." He sat at the chair she nodded him to, which was the far end of the kitchen table beside the window, where the warm late-morning light came in through the open shutters and where her grandmother had always seated company. He set the hat on his knee. He set the canvas bag at his feet. "What's your name?" "Eli Pratt. Hattie Lynn." She brought him the bread and the butter and the broth and the water. She did not sit. She stood at the kitchen block and watched him eat without watching him in the way a person watches a thing they are afraid of. He ate slowly. He did not crowd the bread. He did not finish the broth in one swallow. He buttered the bread the small, careful way of a man who had been raised somewhere to butter bread carefully. "What brings you?" she said. "Walking south. I have a brother in the lower valley I have not seen in 9 years. Why now?" He thought a moment, because I had got far enough from where I'd been to know I would not be going back. Hattie Lynn took the cloth from the kitchen block and folded it once and set it back where it had been. She had not heard a man answer a question that plainly in 2 years. "There is work in this country," she said. "The freight house at the Crossroads will take a hand. The Hetch place needs a man for the haying through August. The Marleys are short a hand for the hay also. The store at the Crossroads needs a sack runner on Wednesdays. I can write a name down for you on each of them if you have a place to sleep tonight. I do not have a place to sleep tonight. There is a small lean-to off the back of this kitchen that I do not use. It is dry, and the roof does not leak, and there's a cot in it from my grandmother's time that I have not been able to bring myself to take down. You can sleep there tonight if you want to. You can sleep there longer if you want to, against work. I would not put you in the house. I would not be asked questions by the town that I do not wish to answer. But the lean-to is not the house, and I would not have a man who has walked this far in the heat sleep at a fence line. That suits. He did not look up from the bread. He said the suits the way he had said the rest of his lines, plain and complete and once. He slept in the lean-to that night. He woke before her in the morning and split the wood that had been waiting at the back of the kitchen for 2 weeks because she had been baking ahead for the festival and had not got to it. And he stacked the wood neat against the south wall in the morning shade, and he was at the kitchen step with his hat in his hand when she opened the door at 6. "Morning. Morning." "You ate the bread," she said. "The bread is the work. You did not have to split the wood. The wood was there." He said the wood the way he said most things. He did not explain. He did not press. She looked at the stack. It was a good stack. He had taken the time. "I will set you a place at the table for breakfast," she said. "Past that, we will talk." He took the place at the kitchen table at the far end by the window, which was the place she had set him the day before, and she set a plate of warm bread and an egg from the hen house and a tin cup of well water at the place beside the plate, and she sat across from him at the near end with her own plate, and they ate without speaking for the first 3 or 4 bites in the way of two people who had not yet learned each other's eating. "The Hetch place," she said. He looked up. "We'll take a hand through August. They're at the South Fork, 3 miles down. You can walk it. You will get $1 a day and your noon meal. You will sleep in their barn the nights you are there. You can come back here on the Sundays. If you do good work for the Hetches, I will know it by Friday. They are not generous with praise. They are generous with money if you do the work, and they will speak of you to the Marleys for September. The Marleys will pay you $1.20 and let you stay in a room above the shed. Past September, there's the freight house, and past the freight house, there's the road south, if you still want it. If I still want it. If you still want it," he thought. "I will start with the Hetch place," he said. "Good." She did not say more than good. He walked to the Hetch place that morning at 7, with a small heel of bread in his canvas bag and his hat pushed back against the sun. He came back on Sunday at noon with $1.50 in his pocket from the Hetches for the half week, and the brown of the high plains sun deepened on his forearms. He sat at the far end of the kitchen table by the window and ate the loaf she had set out for him and drank the broth she had warmed in the pan, and did not say anything for the first quarter hour. Then he set his fork down and said, "Mrs. Lynn, Miss Lynn, Miss Lynn, the Hetches will keep me through August. They have said so. That is what I thought. I will pay you 20 cents a week for the cot and the breakfast on Sundays. That is fair. I do not want to take what I have not paid for." She thought about it. 15 the week, she said. The cot is empty otherwise, and the breakfast is bread I bake regardless. Past August we will see. That suits. He laid 3 nickels on the kitchen table beside his plate. She did not put them away yet. She left them there until he went back to the Hetch place at dusk, and then she put them in the small tin she kept on the shelf above the stove where she kept her own coin, and she did not separate the nickels from the rest of the coin in the tin, and she did not let herself think about why she had not separated them. He was at her table on the Sundays through August and the second week of September. The slow geographical shift was in his hat. He had been hanging the brown felt hat on the wooden peg by the kitchen door from the first Sunday, because there was a row of pegs there, and an empty peg on the row was where his hat went. By the third Sunday, the hat had moved one peg closer to the apron that hung on the row beside it, which was her grandmother's apron and which she had not been able to take down in 2 years. By the fifth Sunday, the hat hung on the peg directly beside the apron, and she had not commented on the move, and he had not announced it, and the apron and the hat hung beside one another for the rest of that summer. The town had things to say about it. The town in that country always did. A woman of 26 baking alone in the small kitchen at the south end of the crossroads with a man sleeping in her lean-to on Sundays was a thing the town was going to say something about, and the town said it through the careful mouth of Mrs. Cordelia Brace, who at 58 had taken upon herself the moral concern of the south end of the crossroads, and who came to Hattie's kitchen door at noon on the second Friday of September with a small woven basket and her gloves and her smile in place. "Hattie, dear," she said at the threshold, "I have brought a little something. May I come in?" "The kitchen is hot, Cordelia. The bread is out at the sill. Come around to the sill if you like." Cordelia came in instead. She set the basket on the kitchen table. She did not sit. She looked at the row of pegs by the kitchen door, where the brown felt hat hung beside the apron, and she looked at the place at the far end of the kitchen table by the window where the plate from breakfast had not yet been cleared, and she looked at Hattie at the kitchen block with her flour-streaked hands. "I have been hearin', dear, that you have a man in your lean-to. I have a man in my lean-to since the third Sunday in July. His name is Eli Pratt, and he works for the Hetches and now for the Marleys, and he pays me 15 cents a week for the cot and the breakfast on Sundays. He does not enter the house except for breakfast on Sundays. He does not touch me. He does not call me by my given name. He does not look at me in any way I have to answer questions about. The talk you have been hearing is your own. You may set it down when you choose." Cordelia Brace's smile did not change. "Hattie, dear, a woman alone with a working man at the back of her kitchen for 2 months is a thing that will be talked about whether you wish it talked about or not. I have come as a friend. Marry him or send him on. There is no third path that does not cost you the kitchen." Hattie did not answer right away. She wiped the flour from her hands on the apron. "Cordelia, I will think on what you have said. I will not be told what to think. You will not be told. I've only come to say, you have said it." Cordelia took her basket. She did not unpack it. She walked to the door. She paused at the row of pegs. "The hat is closer to the apron than it was last Sunday." "It is, I noticed. Good day, Hattie." She went out. The kitchen was very quiet for one full breath after she was gone. Hattie stood at the kitchen block and did not let her hands shake, and they did not shake, because she had trained them out of shaking a long time before in a kitchen her grandmother had been particular about, and it had become an evenness that did not leave her under any pressure she could remember. Eli came back from the Marleys on the Sunday after at noon. She had bread on the sill and broth on the stove and the small tin of his 3 nickels on the kitchen table beside his plate, where she had set them out as if to give them back. He saw the nickels. He set his hat on the peg beside the apron. He sat down at the far end of the table by the window. "What are the nickels? The nickels you have paid me for the cot and the breakfast since July. Why are they on the table? Cordelia Brace was here on Friday." He looked at the nickels. He did not pick them up. "What did she say?" "She said, 'Marry me or send you on.' She said there is no third path that does not cross the kitchen, he thought. He picked his fork up and set it back down. He did not look up at her yet. "Hattie," he said. She listened. "I've been thinking on this since the first Sunday of August. I've not said anything because I did not want to put you in a place where you had to answer me before you were ready. I'm saying it now because Cordelia Brace has put you in that place anyway, and I would not have you answer her instead of me. I have a wage. I will have a steadier wage at the freight house in October. I would like to be at this table on more than Sundays. I would like to put my name beside yours. I will leave the lean-to and ride to the South Fork and sleep at the Marleys' shed for as long as you need me to before you answer. I am not asking you in a way that puts you on a clock. I am asking you in a way that you will know I have asked." Hattie Lynn stood at the kitchen block with her chapped hands on the wood and looked at the man who had walked up her 2 steps 3 months before and asked nothing of her and had been at her table in the same chair every Sunday since. She thought about her grandmother's apron on the peg. "I am not putting you out, Eli," she said. He looked up. "I am not putting you out. You will stay in the lean-to through Tuesday, because the talk needs to settle that long for me to look at it clean. On Wednesday morning at 6, you will come around to this door, and you will ask me your question again in this kitchen at my table, and I will answer you in this kitchen at my table. That is the way I would like to do it. Not because I do not know my answer, because I would like to have the answering done in this kitchen and not in the lean-to, and not on a Sunday after a woman of the town has come to my door, and not under a roof my grandmother put up that I have not yet got my own hands fully under. That suits." He picked his fork up. He ate the bread. He did not look at her while he ate, and she did not look at him, and the kitchen was very quiet but for the stove, and the brown felt hat hung on the peg beside her grandmother's apron, and the small tin of his 3 nickels sat on the kitchen table between them, and was not yet picked up. Cordelia Brace came to the kitchen door on Tuesday afternoon with no basket and no smile. She had heard from the Marleys that Eli Pratt had taken a cot at the shed for 2 nights. She had heard that he had not been at the lean-to since Sunday. She had heard a story of her own making about why. "I had hoped, Hattie, that you would do the right thing. I am doing the right thing. You have sent him on. I have not sent him on. He will be at this kitchen door on Wednesday morning at 6. Cordelia's mouth moved once. "To do what?" "To ask me a question, Cordelia, which I will answer in this kitchen at my table. A woman of sense answers a man's question before the town has to ask it of her. I am not a woman of sense by your reckoning, Cordelia. I am a woman of bread and a kitchen and a grandmother in the ground, and I will answer this question in the order I have set, and not in the order you have set for me. Good day." Cordelia stood at the threshold. She looked at the row of pegs. The brown felt hat was still on its peg beside the apron, the way Eli had left it on Sunday before he had ridden to the Marleys. She had clearly hoped to see the peg empty. "Good day, Hattie." She went down the 2 steps. The dust at her shoes settled slow. Hattie stood at the kitchen block and watched her go, and did not let her face do anything until the buggy at the road had turned and the dust had settled. Eli came at 6 on Wednesday morning. He came up the 2 steps. He did not knock. He stopped at the threshold the way he had stopped at the threshold the first day, with his hat in his hand and his face composed and his eyes steady. The kitchen was warm with the morning baking heat. The first loaf was just out of the oven on the sill. The table was set for 2 at the far end by the window. The kettle was on. The brown felt hat was still on the peg beside the apron from Sunday, untouched since. He looked at the table. He looked at her. "Miss Lynn," he said, "I would like to put my name beside yours. I would like to be at this table on more than Sundays. I have a wage. I will have a steadier wage at the freight house in October. I am not asking you in a way that puts you on a clock. I am asking you again because you asked me to." She did not let her hands fidget. She had trained that out of herself a long time ago. "Eli Pratt," she said, "I will let you put your name beside mine." He nodded once. He did not move toward her yet. He set the hat on the peg beside the apron. He sat down at the far end of the table by the window. She set the warm bread on the plate at his place. She poured the broth into the bowl beside it. She sat across from him at the near end with her own plate. That was the asking and the answering. They ate the bread and the broth without speaking. The kitchen was warm. The kettle ticked. They were married at the small chapel at the crossroads on a clear, bright afternoon in late September, with the cottonwoods at the lane just starting to gold at the tips. The Hetches stood up with them because the Hetches had given Eli the first wage. The Marleys' eldest daughter held the rings. Cordelia Brace did not come. Eli moved his bag and his canvas roll from the lean-to into the back room of the house in the second week of October, and the lean-to went back to being a lean-to, and the cot from her grandmother's time was left in it because Hattie had decided in her own quiet way that some things stayed where they had been put. He took the freight house in October. He worked there for 38 years. He came home to the kitchen at the south end of the crossroads every evening at dusk, and Hattie Lynn was at the kitchen window watching the road for him every evening at dusk for 38 years. And the bread was on the sill, and the broth was on the stove, and the brown felt hat went on the peg beside her apron in the row by the kitchen door, and the two of them sat at the kitchen table by the window for the noon Sunday meal and the evening weekday supper for the rest of his life, and the rest of her life until the cottonwoods at the lane had gone gold and bare and green and gold again 40 times in their kitchen window. On the last warm afternoon of his life, a Sunday in late August in the 40th year, with the cottonwoods at the lane just starting to gold at the tips, Hattie was at the kitchen sill sliding the second loaf out of the oven, and Eli was at the kitchen table at the far end by the window, slower than he had been, his hands folded on the wood, his brown felt hat on the peg beside her apron behind him. "Hattie," he said. She turned. "Yes. I've been thinking on the day I came up your steps. I know it." He looked at her. "There's bread enough for two," he said. "There is." She brought the loaf to the table and set it at the place at the far end by the window. He looked at it. The corner of his mouth moved the smallest amount, the way it had moved at the buckwheat honey on the cottonwood frame 9 summers in, the way it had moved at the second nickel on the kitchen table, the way it had moved every Sunday for 40 years at the bread on the sill. He ate a small piece. She sat across from him at the near end. The kettle ticked. The brown felt hat hung on the peg beside her apron in the row by the kitchen door. The kitchen was warm. The cottonwoods at the lane stirred in a breath of late August air. This was the story of Hattie and Eli, the woman with bread enough for two, and the stranger at her door who stayed 40 years. Tell me in the comments if you enjoyed this one. We are always glad you came to listen.